Welcome to a special Thursday edition of the Post-Gazette Penguins podcast. I'm your host, King Jemison, joined today by Matt Vensel. And I know it's ancient history at this point, but you might remember him as the PG Pens beat writer from 2018 until November of this year, before he was promoted to the onerous task of being my boss, along with many other Post-Gazette sports writers. But Matt, you thought you could get away from the Penguins. They just won't let you go. And before we dive into hockey today, and we're going to talk about, let's kind of take a wider look at the season so far, plus give some thoughts on the trade deadline and the team's playoff chances. But before we do that, why don't you tell folks about what you've thought of the editor life so far?
Yeah, everybody really cares about my glamorous life. No, I've really enjoyed it. I get to work with a lot of talented reporters over at the Post-Gazette. If you guys followed my work over the years, I like to tell some fun stories, some behind-the-scenes stories, and we've got a lot of reporters like King here who want to do the same thing. So it's been a lot of fun to work with people like King and Noah Howells and Jason Mackey on their stories, and a little bit more of a behind-the-scenes role. So I've enjoyed it. It's allowed me to have more time with my kids, which I think is good. My wife she was tired of me by December 1st, but she has not left me yet. So things are good. Thank you, King.
Congratulations on that. We'll check back in a couple months and see what she thinks with you around the house a little more. But seriously, I'm so grateful you're in this role. You've been extremely helpful to me, kept me from looking stupid in my first few months in this position, and improved my writing too. So you're doing a great job, and we're super grateful for you.
That's the job. That's the job. You guys are already good. We just want to make you look this much better.
We're going to talk about the Penguins in a second, but first want to let you know that this show is presented by FanDuel, where you can bet on all the NHL and Olympic hockey action. Yesterday, Erik Karlsson, Rickard, Rakell each picked up a point for Sweden, and their surprisingly tight 5-2 win over Italy. The final score is a little bit deceiving. That game was tied in the second period. But today, Sidney Crosby and Canada are playing Czechia. I think I pronounced that right. And Arturs, Silovs, and Latvia are battling the U.S. I've not seen yet whether Silovs is going to start. I don't really think he will. I think that'll be Elvis Merzlikins for Latvia, but we'll see. One line to look at FanDuel: Crosby's over-under points total is set at 6.5 at FanDuel for the tournament. His team's probably only going to play 6 games, but if you think he can eclipse the point per game mark as he did at Four Nations a year ago, then that's out there for you to bet on. Minus 132 odds for the over. Looks like Crosby's going to slot into a third line center role between Mitch Marner and Mark Stone to start the tournament, but he's going to get plenty of opportunities on the power play and to rack up points there. But plenty of time to talk more about the Olympics. Let's start with the Penguins. Matt, you were the beat writer at the start of this season. What were you expecting from this team?
I wasn't expecting this. I thought they would be bad. Not only did I think they were bad, I think they were kind of low-key trying to be bad. You looked at the moves they made, or more so the moves they didn't make this time or last summer. It just looked like they were kind of going for another gap year with an eye towards 26, 27. I actually did an interview with Dan Muse early in training camp, Q&A, and at the end of it, I said, look, a lot of people think you guys are going to be bad. I said, I have to raise my hand here. Like, I'm not going to pretend that I think you guys are going to be great. And then, the Q&A went right next to my prediction where I had them 7th in the Metro. And Dan Muse handled it well and said, look, it's up to us to write our story. Like, you guys can write your stories and we're going to write ours. And 5 months into the season or whatever it is, they're writing a heck of a story.
Yeah, they certainly are. They are now 2nd in the Metro. They've got a nice 5-point cushion on 4th, just 1 point up on 3rd. That's the Islanders, but 5 points up over the Blue Jackets in 4th. And Matt, if we're going to talk about what's led them to this shocking start, really, what has surprised you most? Which players or aspects of the team have stood out?
Yeah, I've been trying to wrap my head around this. I mean, I think the hockey world is trying to wrap their heads around it, like the NHL, people around the league. Obviously, people beyond Pittsburgh started to get hip to what was going on here, back last month in January when they really kicked it into overdrive. And, there's a lot of things that are surprising. The goaltending, Malkin's resurgence, the fact that guys like Wotherspoon and Brazeau have been such useful players. I mean, it looked like, those were the signings I referenced earlier, not to knock those guys, but, they're signing guys like that to, $2 million a year per deals. And you're kind of thinking, okay, these guys are good depth players, but how's this guy going to play in the top pair with Erik Karlsson? And they've been playing great. But I think it all comes back to Dan Muse. I mean, honestly, you had a really nice piece 2-3 weeks ago where you kind of looked at some of the statistical differences between this year and last year. And obviously coaching has a lot to do with it. And that's not a knock on Mike Sullivan, but when you try to pinpoint what is different about this team, and there's probably a lot of factors. I think chemistry is one of them, but I think a lot of it points back to coaching. Even just the fact you had a great nugget in that story about their starts. The fact that the Penguins often, I don't know what their record is now or how often they're scoring the first goal of the game, but, so often in recent years, we saw this team completely sleepwalk through entire games. They just didn't show up and compete. And you know better. You've watched all these games. Like, you could count on one hand the number of games where this team just flat out didn't show up and play. And I think that comes back to coaching, and it spreads to the goaltending. It spreads to putting guys in the right places. People like Karlsson having a resurgence because they're able to play more of their games. But, I think that's the common denominator here is coaching, Dan Muse and his staff.
Yeah, you referenced it. They've scored first in 34 of 56 games this season. I believe that's more times than they scored first all of last season. And so, yeah,
I think they had 34 games where they had let in the first shot of the game. I mean, maybe not that high, but it was like 13, right? I mean, it's just, that was a fluky stat, but it just speaks to the fact that these guys are coming right out of the gate hot. And that was often not the case in recent years.
Yeah, you touched on a lot of the things that I would list as surprises as well, and I think Dan Muse's influence has an influence on each one of those things. But Wotherspoon being a legitimate top pair defenseman, that is pretty shocking, and the fact that he's bringing a little bit of offense too. Then Anthony Mantha, in addition to Justin Brazeau, another one of those unheralded signings. I don't think many people had him third on the team with 42 points at this point in the season. And then maybe the biggest of all has been Ben Kindle, making the team out of training camp. And then he's got 14 goals at this point in the season. Looks like not just an acceptable pick at number 11, but a real steal there. Maybe one of the best players to come out of this draft class. So there's so many things you could point to. Ryan Shea, he's by far the team's leader in plus minus, has been really good. But is there anything that sticks out to you as a disappointment at this point in an otherwise sterling season?
Man, disappointment would be a difficult one. I guess maybe Chris Letang. And that's a mild disappointment. I mean, it's not, the guy is 38 years old. It shouldn't be a surprise that we continue to see him decline. But I think that speaks more to the fact that it's kind of hard to find guys who have underwhelmed or disappointed. Really, everyone is playing at or above expectations. I think a great example of that is another thing you've written about is the fourth line. Over the last few years, the Penguins have just kind of had a revolving door on the fourth line, trying to find some sort of identity. Even as recently as last year when, Achari was on that line and we got a little bit of Dewar, it just sort of was a line that just was kind of out there, like the definition of low event hockey. And this group right now, it's great. I mean, not only are they, have pretty good defensive results, but they're scoring. More importantly, they're getting zone time. They're making plays that make a difference. I know Mike Sullivan always talked about, he just wants to get juice from the fourth line. And, we hadn't really seen it since the trio of Teddy Bluger, Brandon Tanev, Zach Aston-Reese, like forever ago. You were in like middle school when that line was happening. I mean, it was only 6 years ago, but you're fairly young. So I would look more towards like it's hard to find things that are disappointing. I think that speaks to a lot of things about this team, even if it's hard to kind of mystify why all this is or explain why this is all happening.
Yeah, I think it's nearly impossible, which is why I think you correctly pointed to Muse. But that fourth line you referenced, they've scored 14 goals and allowed just 7 according to Natural Stat Trick's line data, which is insane given that they are starting the majority of their shifts in the defensive zone. They're never getting offensive zone starts, essentially, but they're still doubling up their opponents on the scoreboard. It's been pretty incredible. I guess if I was going to point to a slight disappointment, it would just be Ville Koivunen and Rutger McGroarty not seizing a role in the NHL roster. And I think that has just as much to do with the fact that you have had guys like Justin Brazeau and Ben Kindle become everyday parts of the rotation that you really can't take out of the lineup. And also, I think in Rutger's case, it has to do with injuries. I think both of them.
That's a better answer than mine, by the way.
I mean, I don't think either one of them has played terribly. I think Koivunen's lack of production was very frustrating. And McGroarty had that problem as well until this most recent stint where I thought he looked better and picked up some points as well. But again, I think that's kind of nitpicking, and I wouldn't say that either of them are seriously off track in their development, which says a lot when it's that hard to come up with a disappointment.
Yeah, I think it's twofold too. I mean, it's those guys have underwhelmed a little bit, Rutger in particular, but it also goes back to the fact that the bottom six is actually playing really well.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think this, the Penguins management can say whatever they want, but I don't think there's any way they anticipated this year playing out like this. I mean, I'm sure they figured by this point they'd be trading off guys like Blake Lizotte or Nola Chari or maybe even Connor Dewar. Instead, those guys are playing so well that there's not really a spot for a Tristan Brose right now. It doesn't make sense for a Ville Koivunen to play on the fourth line when you have Novak and Brazeau playing well. So I think it's kind of twofold there with the fact that guys like Rutger and Koivunen and Brose are still down at Wilkes. Avery Hayes, could see him. They got some good players.
Well, yeah, one more thing before we take a break. Just quickly on Avery Hayes, you wrote about him at the tail end of last season after he signed an entry-level contract with the Penguins. He had 2 goals in his NHL debut right before the break. He went back down to Wilkes and had a hat trick right before they took their all-star break. Of all the players, these young players we've mentioned who are having a hard time cracking the rotation, I feel like it may be hardest to keep Avery Hayes down there given what you saw. I mean, do you think they might give him another shot to see if that was just one fluky game or if he can continue to produce at the NHL level?
Yeah, there has to be an open roster spot or lineup spot for them to justify it. So, I mean, that's kind of the X factor. But if you look at the candidates for a call-up, yeah, I'd put him right at the top of the list. I mean, the kid's got a lot of swagger. He's got skill, and he can play in all situations. It means obviously they're not going to be putting him on the top power play, but at least at the AHL level, he's proved to be a guy that Kirk McDonald trusts in pretty much all situations. So, yeah, out of the guys who are down there right now, and that's with Tristan Brose at the AHL All-Star game right now. I think if they pick one of those guys to come up after the Olympic break, it should be Hayes and see what he's got.
Yeah, particularly when the center rotation is more set than the wingers. I think you could more easily see a need to put somebody on the wing at some point. But again, I think it's going to have to take injuries given how well the 12-man rotation forward lineup is played. Let's take a quick break, and then we're going to come back and turn our attention from the past to the future, talk a little bit about playoffs and trade deadline. Welcome back to the Post-Gazette Penguins podcast. I'm King Jemison, joined by my boss and predecessor on the Penguins beat, Matt Vensel.
I mean, it's technically true, but do you have to introduce me like that? It sounds like I'm forcing you to be on your podcast.
Nobody can force me to log on here to the beautiful StreamYard and deliver content to YouTube. Okay, so with all the positive surprises we just mentioned in the previous segment, the Penguins would be in a playoff spot. They'd actually be hosting a first-round series if the postseason started today. Matt, you're a notorious pessimist. How confident are you that this team is going to get it across the finish line and make the playoffs?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I would be surprised if they did not make the playoffs. Not only are they playing so well and have given themselves such a statistical cushion in the standings, but a lot of the rest of the Metro has been a disappointment this year. I mean, Carolina is consistent as always, but we all thought that the Rangers would be in the mix for a playoff spot. Their first year under Mike Sullivan has been a total disaster. The Devils are a mess. The Flyers didn't really take a step forward. Capitals are in the mix. I think they'll make a push down the stretch here. But yeah, if you look at the other teams around them, it's just hard to imagine not only the Penguins like falling flat on their faces. It's possible, but also other teams kind of taking advantage. So get ready, King. Get ready. You might get to cover a first-round playoff series.
In
beautiful Long Island.
Yeah, can't wait to be making that drive back and forth. Could also be Columbus. I guess that'd be a little bit easier drive, but there's
the Steve Mears Bowl. Steve Mears, my good friend Steve, who is now a Columbus broadcaster,
and the Igor Chinnikov Bowl. Now that would be interesting. And Danton Heinen, who was in that trade, the Pittsburgh traded to the Blue Jackets, has actually kind of played a role for them. So there'd be multiple revenge opportunities in that series. But let's say they do make the first round. Do you see this as a team that could advance beyond that?
They could maybe win a round. I mean, if they match up with a team like the Islanders, who are another team that is kind of arrived ahead of schedule in the midst of sort of a transition. I still don't see this team being able to kind of match up and go for a deep run. I mean, I guess you never know, just given how weird the Eastern Conference has been this year. I mean, if they were in the West, I'd give them no chance of winning a playoff series, but it's possible with the Atlantic not looking great either that they might be able to string together a couple playoff series wins, which would be a great story. No doubt. I'm not holding my breath, but we'll see. I mean, there is something special about this team. It doesn't mean they're going to win the cup or come close, but just kind of the chemistry and how all the parts are kind of fitting together. There's definitely some good vibes with this team right now, and it makes the short-term outlook beyond this year look much more optimistic than it did, even 4 months ago.
I don't see anybody beating Tampa Bay in the Eastern Conference, but weirder things have happened in the Stanley Cup playoffs before. And the Hurricanes are actually tied with Tampa Bay in terms of points, but I don't think anybody necessarily trusts them to show that regular season form all the way through the playoffs. But yeah, I kind of see it as if the Penguins make the playoffs as it stands right now, I think they'd be a favorite to win that first round series. And then I think they'd probably bow out in a tough matchup in the second round. But they have a chance to make the roster better. This is a team that, as we just talked about, is loaded with assets. Do you see them making a move before that trade deadline in early March?
Yeah, you and I have talked about this privately. It's a tricky situation because of what I said just a minute ago about the team's chemistry and how it's kind of hard to explain why this team is clicking the way it does. When you look at a guy like Parker Wotherspoon or Bergeau, who were kind of journeyman type players until a couple of years ago, and now they're playing prominent roles for a playoff team. I do think we've gotten to the point where we're not worried about the Penguins being sellers, and it's more of a question of do they want to buy. And I do think, at least in terms of giving up premium assets, it's got to be a move that makes sense for the long term. I mean, that's why you hear, big names this time of year. Someone like Panarin wouldn't have made sense for the Penguins, but Jason Robertson does, because he is a young player who they could potentially lock in for the long term. So I don't see them taking a big swing unless it's something that they can justify being a long-term move. And then it becomes a question of like the kind of the cost and the analysis of whether it's worth it. I mean, you can definitely point to, a need to bring in some depth on defense, and maybe there's another forward they could bring in, although it would be hard to find a spot to plug a player in. So it's a tricky situation for sure. You include the fact that they have young guys that they want to get playoff experience as well if things open up. So I don't expect the Penguins to be tremendously active, but I'm sure they will explore all their options. We're talking about Kyle Dubas here.
Yeah, no, he doesn't like to sit on his hands. I would say that Sergei Murashov or Ben Kendall are off the table, and that they would be very hesitant to include a prospect like Will Horkoff or Bill Zonin or Rucker McGroarty or Avery Hayes. But you have even more potentially tantalizing prospects beyond that. And I think more importantly, they have 19 picks in the first 3 rounds of the next 4 drafts. Complicated sentence, but long story short, they're a +7 in terms of first 3 round picks over the next 4 years. So they can spend some of that high value draft capital if they wanted to try to plug a player or snab a player off of a struggling team that just wants draft assets.
Yeah, I think it's picks. Like, I don't think they want to. They very much are looking. Over the last 2 years, they've been looking for young pros, guys who are ready to step in. So I think they're going to want to trade picks more than anything. If you want to talk about one potential prospect, they could maybe move. What about Joel Blomqvist? Just because of Miroshev's presence, it's a logjam in Wilkes right now. If they're going to trade a prospect, I think maybe someone like that would make sense. But it's more so they're probably going to be looking to move picks.
Yeah. I think the only person that's been really mentioned that I would make a Godfather offer for is Jason Robertson. But I feel like that is a move that's going to make more sense for team and player in the summer because the Stars still consider themselves and are Stanley Cup contenders. They probably don't want to trade away I believe their leading goal scorer, maybe their leading point guy. But that is the one person that you would consider parting ways with one of your top prospects for. But we talked about probably the biggest area of need is on the blue line. I've got some names there that I'll throw by you and see what you think. But starting with kind of Dubas's favorite type of trade, which is going after a young player with untapped potential in sort of a buy low move. One guy that sticks out there, not at a position of need whatsoever, but certainly a talented player is Shane Wright in Seattle, who, if you look at most of the trade boards out there, he's on them. Potentially on the move, even though he's a 22-year-old former number 4 overall pick. The Penguins don't need a center, but he could be somebody who helps them in the long term. Do you see that as a type of move they might consider making?
Yes, for sure. He's a young guy who's played in the league, a lot of pedigree, as you said. He can play center, he can play wing. Yeah, absolutely. That's the type of player Kyle's looking for. Plus, he played in the OHL. That's what I was just looking here on my handy computer. Wanted to confirm that, but obviously Kyle and his scouts have deep ties to the OHL. So I'm sure they're incredibly familiar with Shane. That would make sense, yeah. That's a good one.
You spent some time with one of those OHL scouts last year for one of my favorite sports stories of the year last season. That seemed like that was quite an experience. We don't have to go into that now, but it was driving around the snowy roads of Ontario, chasing the next young thing for the players, for the Penguins.
They didn't tell me who they were going to pick, though. I kind of was like, they're going to pick an OHL guy, and then they went with Kindle, but I guess their Western scouts knew what they were talking about.
Yeah, I would say so, from the other side of Canada. So another young player that is more at a position of need is Braden Schneider for the Rangers. Not the same level of pedigree as Shane Wright and not the same level of talent, but he is a 24-year-old pending RFA. The Rangers are trying to get younger, so I don't really know why they'd trade away somebody with team control at that age who's been a top pairing defenseman for them. But he's a right shot. That's what the Penguins need. I could see that being another guy that they potentially take a swing at the deadline.
I like him as a player. He's well-rounded, has some size, has some snarl in his game. Obviously, he's far from a finished product at this point, just like a lot of young defensemen. But if you look at their kind of long-term depth chart on the right side, that's definitely an area where they're lacking. They have Brunick, who we expect in the NHL or in the next year or so. But beyond him, there's not a ton on the right side.
Yeah, which is where you could see them potentially going for a rental upgrade. But would you make a move for somebody like Connor Murphy or Luke Shen, who would literally just be a rest of the season, shore up our right side of the blue line and see what we can do in the playoffs? Or do you think that's not worth the price you'd have to pay?
You mean Penguins great Luke Shen?
Yes. Who had a one-day tenure, or did he even make it a day?
I think it was like 36 hours.
Okay.
Yes. What a time. Maybe. I mean, Clifton is an imperfect player. Obviously, Matt Dumba's down in the minor leagues for a reason. So you could point to, if you were looking at the depth chart, like third pair right D is an obvious area that could be improved. But I mean, it comes back to the cost. I mean, I wouldn't be giving up, even though they have all those picks that you reference. I would rather keep my powder dry unless we're talking about like third or later round pick.
Okay, as I continue to pepper you with names, what about guys who actually would have another year of team control but would be quite expensive, like Justin Falk or Dougie Hamilton? Either one of those pique your interest?
No, not really. Good players, obviously on the decline. And then you have a redundancy factor with some of their older defensemen. Those ones don't make as much sense to me, although I have seen some dot connecting from folks with those guys.
Yeah, I kind of agree. That doesn't seem like a Dubas move to take on a major cap hit from an older player when you might as well just try to see what you have with some of these unheralded defensemen who have led you to this point so far. Like, I don't think you need to be in a hurry to get Ryan Shea or Parker Wotherspoon out of the lineup. They've both been really, really good. That third pair could use some shoring up for sure. But, I look at Ilya Solovyov as a guy who's jumped in and played really, really well so far. I don't think he's going to hurt you as a depth defenseman either. Well, going back to some wings, I would say that, or just forwards in general, I would say that if Alex Tuch was available, as people thought he might be earlier, he might be worth using some of your cap space on, but I don't see Buffalo breaking it up as well as they've been playing.
Me neither.
And then another guy that you brought up to me privately, Vincent Trocheck, a Pittsburgh native who not playing a position of need. He's a center, but, could you see them trying to steal him from the Rangers as they're selling off anybody they can?
Probably not. Just given his age and the term on his contract, bringing a guy like that would basically signal that maybe Evgeny Malkin wasn't in their plans beyond this year. Although we have seen Malkin on the wing, maybe that's just what he's going to be for the rest of his career there. But there was interest in Trocheck during the Hextall era. I actually think that if they had not re-signed Malkin, that we probably would be seeing Trocheck back home in a Penguins uniform right now. But that sort of seems like one that maybe the ship has sailed a little bit, even though there's no doubt he could help them in the short term.
Yeah, he definitely could. But
good player.
At a $5.6 million cap hit for 3 more seasons beyond this one, that's a hefty price to pay. That's going to be declining value over the course of that contract as he gets older. But
I mean, if they're confident that he, would be better this year in a kind of a winning environment, crazy to say that about the Penguins, and also that they do all their analytics and, age modeling, if they felt like he wasn't a player that was going to significantly decline, then maybe, because those salaries aren't unreasonable as the cap continues to go up, but I still would be surprised if they did that.
Yeah. And then one more young player I wanted to throw at you that I know much less about, but Jesperi Kotkaniemi in Carolina, 25-year-old former number 3 overall pick, has seen his role diminish. People think he might be available. You think Dubas could swing another in-division trade for a talented young player who's fallen out of favor?
What's his contract like? Do you know off the top of your head?
I believe he is a pending RFA, but let me check that out.
Okay.
Because
I know he was in the, because he was in the whole.
No, it's not. He's not a pending RFA. He is actually signed for 4 more seasons beyond this one. I believe that the Hurricanes were able to pick him up when the Canadians did not match.
Yeah, well, that was a whole saga that predates you. But those two organizations basically got in a little. I'm trying to think of a way to say it where it wouldn't involve potential profanity, but they got in a little scrum, we'll say, over offer sheets where the Canadians, I believe, tried to get Sebastian Aho with an offer sheet, and they matched. So Carolina got some retribution with a 1-year kind of loaded cap hit, and then they signed him to that contract after that. Anyways, that's a history lesson on Kotkaniemi, who I can't pronounce, but I don't think it makes sense, no, because he projects like he was a high pick and just really hasn't panned out. Maybe with a change of scenery, there's more to the player, but right now he's looking like more of a bottom 6 types player, and I just don't really think that's what the Penguins need right now.
And they've already made that buy low swing with Igor Chinikov, and I don't think that could work out any better. He leads the Penguins in goals since he entered the lineup on January 1st.
You called it. You're a big Igor guy. Right from the start, you were like, this guy can shoot.
Well, that's the one thing I read and saw online, and I'm glad that they've given him opportunities to do that. But I don't think anybody saw this all-around game coming.
That's what surprised me, and that's what makes him a different player than like Tomasino. Because Tomasino came in guns a-blazing too with the scoring. Scored a big goal in Boston, a game winner, I think, in his second game. And then he just didn't bring anything else to the table. Whereas with Chinakhov, we've definitely seen it. The defense, the skating, the forechecking. I've been surprised by everything he brings to the table.
Yeah, and he seems to love playing with Malkin, and Malkin seems to love playing with him. And that may be the most important thing of all. But, okay, so just to wrap up the trade deadline talk, you might think that a team that has outperformed expectations like this with veterans like Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin, that Dubas might feel pressure to show them that he's trying to win by making a buy now move, a win now move, to just signal his confidence in the team. Do you think he feels that way? And do you think when you look at all the available options that they will make some sort of short-term game move at the deadline?
I do. Yeah, I do think they'll do something minor. I think it'll be more quiet than maybe other years, and maybe more so than the Penguins would like. But I do think he'll do something, even if it's a symbolic move, to basically say like, hey, I believe in you guys and invest, which, a couple months ago, that seemed like there was no way it was going to happen with this team. But like zooming out, like even if the Penguins don't do that much and they lose in the first round of the playoffs, like, 6 months ago, we were talking about whether we could see this be the last year for Sidney Crosby. And I think there's enough of a proof of concept with the young players and with the direction of the team that all that's quieted. I mean, we haven't really heard any noise about Sidney Crosby. And I think that's a positive. I think this team has done enough, whether they add at the deadline or not, to show Sid that, hey, stick it out in Pittsburgh. We're going to be getting better. There's more young guys on the way. We have all this cap space. So, yeah, I think to sum it up, I don't think Kyle needs to show anything to Sid in particular at this point. I think there's been enough this year where Sid can go into the offseason and tell himself a story that the Penguins are going to take a leap forward next year, and he could still potentially win a Stanley Cup here. And we'll see.
I think that certainly can't be ruled out, given the type of improvements we've seen from so many different players who still seem to have higher ceilings, and with some of the young guys on the way and all the assets they have to add to it from there. I think that's a good way to wrap it up. We'll see Sidney Crosby and Canada are starting their pursuit of a gold medal as we record this. We'll keep you updated on all things Olympics here on this feed. Probably won't be back with another episode until next week on the Post-Gazette Penguins podcast, but please like and subscribe whenever you're watching this, and please subscribe at post-gazette.com for the best of our work. I've had a series this week on Penguins at the break, passing out grades to every player. The last part of that series will run tomorrow, talking about the team's surprisingly strong goalies, who we really didn't touch on at all, but that's certainly been a big part of the turnaround this year.
If you write 1,600 words on this one too, you're fired.
Sounds good. See, this is why you don't have your boss on the podcast. But
you can't possibly write 1,600 words about 2.5 goalies, but King will try.
I think I can keep this one to maybe half of that, but we'll see.
Beautiful.
We'll see how excited I get about writing about Arturs Silovs. But for Matt Vensel, I'm King Jemison. Thank you so much for watching, and have a great day.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.